Hey, Dave, I appreciate you coming to hang out with me. You are the Director of Brewing and Head Brewer at Lost Worlds Brewing in North Carolina. How's everything down there in North Carolina today?
Good. Warm, but good.
Man, this heat everywhere across the country is getting brutal heat right now, especially those folks out west. I feel
Uh,
bad for what they're going through.
same here, yeah.
Now, one reason I'm excited for today is you kind of snuck into my life in a weird way. So on Facebook, I try to stay pretty true to not becoming, Facebook friends with anyone I actually, either haven't met in person before or have some sort of relationship. And I don't know when or how it happened, but apparently you and I are friends on Facebook. And I absolutely love the content that you put out. And I almost feel like even though we've never actually spoken until today, I feel like I've had a nice glimpse in your life for the past several months, and you seem like an overall great guy.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I'm the same way with Facebook. Unless I personally know somebody or it's industry related, yeah, I'm the same way. I don't accept people.
Has that changed at all over the past year when so much of the world has been so virtual?
No, not really. If anything, I've kind of closed it up a little bit for me. Yeah.
That's an interesting observation because I've spent so much time on the internet. I facilitated so many just fun relationships through the internet and virtually, whether it's Facebook or Zoom or however we're connecting. I think it's been a great opportunity to connect, but I know in the current state of things, it's great to get back out there. And you had told me prior that you just finished up a collaboration beer release.
We did. So we a brewer from Mad Mole Brewing in Wilmington, North Carolina, on the coast here, was in our place a few months ago. Apparently, his wife went to college around here, and they were at a wedding. So after the wedding, they all came in here, the bride in her dress, everything, the whole bridal party. And him and our founder were talking, because I wasn't here that night. But they started talking. He said something about a collab. So we said, all right. So, yeah, we did one last week. We went down there and did one. And then next week, they're coming up here to do the same exact beer. So we'll compare and see how they go against each other.
Awesome. What style did you brew?
It's an American Pale Ale that uses Zamba hops. So I got a buddy with BSG, and he sent us some samples, and we just thought it'd be kind of neat. The other brewery, Mad Mole, is more IPA heavy in their portfolio. We're more sessionable and do a bunch of different styles, but we want to try to do like an APA type series.
That is a delicious style. I think it's perfect for this time of year. And anyone listening, we're in June 2021 right now, so that sounds delicious to me right now. Now, I want to begin, before we kind of dive into your brewing career, there's a few rapid-fire questions I want to throw your way. First one, do you like blue cheese?
You read that, didn't you? Yeah, I do.
Okay, Coke or Pepsi?
Coke.
And your favorite candy?
Reese's Peanut Butter Cups.
See, because of the information you're putting out on Facebook, I already knew this great information about you. It's just so funny how people connect, and I had to throw it out there for you today. But let's get into the brewing talk. You and I have met on the internet, but I want to get to know you today and let everybody else learn a little bit about your career in the industry. Now, you ended up right now, you're at Lost Worlds Brewing Company. It's an archaeology-themed brewery, which I think's fantastic. And we're going to go into a lot about your experience at Lost Worlds later on, but I want to start off by asking you, what's the coolest artifacts you have in the brewery?
Oh, wow. A lot about archaeology. That's our founders. They could talk about it more. I mean, we have some replicated skulls on the walls. We have some Guatemalan masks that are about years old that are pretty cool. We have some Egyptian paintings that I actually went and picked up and got, which are pretty cool. They're on the wall. So there's a lot of cool things.
How do you prevent guests from touching these artifacts?
We put them in places that they can't usually.
That's a good answer. Now, looking back when you were growing up, I can't imagine you thought you'd be in the brewing industry 25 years later. But when you were just a kid running around the playground, where did you grow up, and what did you want to be when you grew up, Dave?
I grew up on Long Island in New York. I was a high school social studies teacher before I was a brewer, so I guess growing up I wanted to be a teacher. And then I remember sitting in college graduation, excuse me, and I had done everything in my life according to my plan, whatever it was. And I was sitting there, and the girl I was dating was a dual major, so we both majored in history, American history, and then she was English. I'm sitting at her graduation ceremony. I think, I can do whatever I want. I don't have to teach history. I don't have to be a teacher. And when I graduated, before I got my teaching job that summer, I walked past a mom and pop beer distributor, like bottle shop pretty much. It did a lot of wholesale too. And they had a help wanted sign in. So I was like, that could be cool. So I went in and got a job there, and I sold beer, moved beer, was a beer delivery guy, anything that needed to be done in this place. Like I said, small mom and pop. And we had, at the time, this was in 95, we had, 300 or 400 different kinds of beers on our wall. And I'd go home every day with a couple different bottles, and I would just try beer. So that's pretty much how I got into it.
Now, were you a craft beer guy before you worked for that company, or was this your first experience with a lot of these brands?
That was pretty much my first experience. Long Island at that time was known as a Bud Coors country, import country. There weren't a lot of breweries, though there was only a couple on the island. But yeah, so I got to try beer from all over the U.S. and the world. There was a brewery that happened to be in Port Jefferson, New York, which is, about a half hour, 45 minutes from where I grew up. It's near where I went to college. And I'd gotten a sweatshirt. It was a brew pub, and I'd gotten a sweatshirt from them. And I was in that town at a coffee joint. I turned around with the coffee I just bought, and the guy behind me was wearing the same sweatshirt. So we started talking and BSing, and it turned out he was the head brewer and co-owner of the place. I told him, I'm starting to get in the beer. I might start home brewing or whatever. He said, why don't you come down and spend a day with me? And I did, and I got hooked.
So were you still teaching history at this time? You were working in distribution? You were? So how are you balancing both?
Working 7 days a week. Yeah, I was substitute teaching. And then on the weekends, if I had any days off during the week, I'd go to the brewery. And on the weekends, I was also working for the distributor and refereeing soccer. So at any given point, I had like 4 jobs going and just working all the time.
But it sounds like you were totally immersing yourself in the beer culture from so many different angles at that point in your life. Now, were you in the back of your mind wanting to quit teaching and just dedicate to one of those jobs that you had?
Yeah, I knew I'd want to go into brewing. Working at that small little brew pub, the owner / head brewer and the other brewer had both gone to Siebel. So they kind of talked me into it. And I decided, to give up teaching and go to brewing school and become a brewer.
So you met this guy in the coffee shop. He tells you to come brew with him. You end up working in the tap room. The next thing you know, you're going to Siebel to learn about, professional brewing. How long was that process from the day you met him in the coffee shop to when you enrolled in Siebel?
Let's see. So I guess I started kind of helping out at the brewery because I apprenticed. I think that was in the fall of 96. And then in June of 97 is when I went to Siebel. Yeah. So they had closed. They were, I got on the tail end of them. So they closed actually Christmas Eve, apparently, of 96. And then, I continued to work at the distributor and referee soccer. And then I went to school in June of 97.
And did you have any plans when you went to Siebel? Did you have a certain area you wanted to end up in with being a brewer? Or, obviously you wanted the education, but what did you want to do next?
I wanted to be a brewer. So, I took their short course in brewing technology. And at that time, it was what they did in their 10-week diploma course, but in 2 weeks. It was pretty intense. So I just tried to swallow as much as I could. I had guys from Miller and Coors, Guinness and Heineken were all in my class. And I was just trying to grab as much info as I could and then, put it on a resume and try to find a brewing job somewhere. Like I said, on Long Island, there was only a couple breweries. I actually walked into one at one point just to go check it out. They were a brew pub too, so they had a restaurant. And I walked in, next thing I know, I'm in the back talking to the brewers, and they're hiring me. I never went in for a job, but they're hiring me, and I decided against it because they didn't want me to go to Siebel. They wanted to teach from within. And I had already put my deposit and paid for it and this and that. I was like, no, I'm going to Siebel. So, yeah.
So that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, 25 years ago, the number of breweries was quite a bit less than we are at today, of course. So when you graduated from Siebel from that course, were you just putting an application out there? Were you going door to door? Or were you just showing up just like that experience? They were offering you jobs on the spot. How did you actually get that job being a brewer somewhere?
So the brew pub on Long Island closed, the one I apprenticed at, and one of the brewer who was there moved up to Maine. So I continued to work for the distributor, kind of putz around a little bit, not being overly serious about it. And it's a funny story. My parents were up in Maine on vacation, and they drive past his brewery. So they stopped. They started talking to him. He was like, "Yeah, actually, I could use someone." So within a week, I went up there.
Nice brewer. You should hire him.
Yeah. So I went up there, and it just became. I wasn't really a brewer at that point. I was the assistant to the brewer. So we did hand bottling, one bottle at a time, hand labeling, one label at a time. That was basically my job at the time. The owner of that place was a doctor, and this was a side project of his. In the mid-'90s, that's what people did. Oh, a side project. I'm going to become rich off this. And so, yeah, with a counter pressure bottle filler, I was doing a pallet of beer a week to go to the distributor. So, yeah.
And what part of Maine were you living in at this time?
This was in Rockland. So I lived in Belfast, which is about 20, 30 miles north of there. Belfast is about 2 hours north of Portland on the coast. I was dating a girl. We both moved up there. She got a job. MBNA's corporate offices were in Belfast at the time, so she got a job there. And I got a job at the brewery. So, yeah, Maine's a cool place. It's really interesting. And you know, in the winter, when 80% of your accounts close, or at least back then it was. Yeah, I worked for 2 different breweries over the course of about the 10, 11 months I was there and got laid off 4 times.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah,
I have not been to Maine, but it's one of the states on my to-do list. A few years ago, a new airline came out of here of Norfolk, Virginia, and they had super cheap tickets out to Denver, Colorado that year. So, instead of taking the planned trip up to Acadia National Park, my wife and I planned to do, we ended up getting like $200 round trip tickets total to go out to Denver for GABF, which was still a fantastic time, but it kept me from experiencing Maine like I've been wanting to do for some time now.
Yeah, it was beautiful up there. It snowed a lot. It got really cold, which I'm okay with. But it was a little difficult. They told us that if you're not from Maine, you're not going to be from Maine. Your kids are not going to be from Maine. And like I said, this was over 20 years ago. The beer scene there was a lot different. It was, I think, a lot ahead of what North Carolina is, probably by about 8 to 10 years, where you went into a supermarket and they have 3 coolers of beer, and 2 of them would be all the local beers, and then 1 would be all the mass-produced imported beers. Back then, it was a lot of what we call like rotation nation now, and everyone just wants the newest thing. That was then up there. I'll take a 6th of this. I'll take a 6th of that. So it was interesting. It was a cool experience.
So from your time in Maine, are there any breweries or experiences that stood out that played like a role in your craft beer journey?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I learned something at both those places. Like the first one, which was called Rocky Bay Brewing, I didn't brew, but I learned some other stuff. I did some outside sales type stuff, so I learned a little bit about that, what to do, what not to do. And then Belfast Bay Brewing was interesting because it was a brewery, a brew pub, an ice cream barn, and something else, all in the same building, all the same owners. And they were really nice people, but the owner didn't necessarily know what to do. And the son-in-law would kind of teach me, and he would say, "All right, this is how I do it. If you find a better way to do it, but don't listen to him." So yeah, I learned it was the school of hard knocks.
The fun of working for a family business.
Yeah, it was fine though. I mean, I learned how to brew. I mean, yeah.
So did they end up going out of business, or what made you leave Maine?
They eventually did after I left. The owner apparently had a massive heart attack, and they kind of scaled down the business. This is after I left, but the girl I was dating, we'd moved from New York to Maine, and then she had went to school about an hour and a half from Charlotte. I had family in Raleigh, family in Winston-Salem, cousins of mine. And actually, I ran into a guy at a beer festival. I'd come down to visit one of my cousins in Raleigh. I went to a beer festival. And I'm just, meeting people, passing out. I had these little business cards made up with my information on it. So you never know what's going to happen in the future. And I got a call one day.
Business card say, Dave?
It's well, I had two. So I had one just my name, address, phone number, email address, and then those are the business ones. And then I had other ones I made up after this girl and I broke up. It was just my name and number, email, and it said a really nice guy. So that's what when someone would ask me for my number, a girl or something, that's what I gave them.
So you didn't give that one to any prospective brewery owner you're looking for a job at?
Yeah, no. So actually, I had those made up after I'd moved to Charlotte and such. So yeah, so I had I'd met someone who was doing an offshoot of a brewery. There used to be a brewery in Charlotte called South End. It was a brew pub. They built a couple. There was one, I think, in Jacksonville, Florida. They were supposed to build one in Atlanta. There was one in Charleston. So they did an offshoot. They had an extremely popular brand called Carolina Blonde. So up in Mooresville, which is about a half hour north of Charlotte, they built a decent-sized microbrewery, a 50-barrel brew house. And their brewmaster at the time calls me up. I'm living in Maine and says, hey, not saying the job's yours, but why don't you fly down for an interview? So I did, and the interview went great. And at this point, the girl and I decided we were going to move to North Carolina. And they didn't give me a definitive answer, but I was looking for a job. So I drove into Charlotte, looked at, there was only a couple breweries, and I think I was at a homebrew store or something. And they said, there's a Rock Bottom. And the only thing I knew about Rock Bottom at the time was I think my parents had been in Portland. They got me a T-shirt from that one. And then when I went to Siebel, we went to the one in Chicago. But that's all I knew about him. So I walked in, and the brewer was there, and he goes, actually, my assistant brewer is leaving. When can you start? So, yeah, and then I was there for 11 years.
Wow. So after they invited you to kind of join their team, how quickly did you start?
I gave them a month because I had to move. So, move, find a place to live. We actually didn't have an apartment when we first moved here for about a week. So we were staying with her brother, which was about an hour away, or my cousins who were an hour away. And we just couldn't line up an apartment at first, and we had gone to the apartment. So
this was what, like late 90s?
This was in 99. Yeah, I started at Rock Bottom in August of 99.
So even then, Rock Bottom probably hadn't been around, but not even a decade. What was that experience like? Because they had a really unique business model, and like you coming in, you'd heard a little bit about Rock Bottom. Before you started working there, what were your expectations like?
I didn't have expectations. I was a young kid in my early to mid 20s. I needed a job, and they offered me a brewing job. So the location I worked for was owned and operated by Gordon Biersch. So when I was hired by Big River Breweries, and Big River used to be based out of Chattanooga, Tennessee. They had a Chattanooga, Nashville. They had one in Greenville, South Carolina, one in Disney in Orlando. And then they built a couple of miscellaneous ones in Jacksonville area, Florida, called Seven Bridges. They bought a couple small places in the area. And then they kind of merged with Rock Bottom, and they built Rock Bottom Atlanta, Rock Bottom Charlotte. And about 6 months after Charlotte was built, they split ways. And part of the agreement was they had to franchise the name. So did that. And then about a month or so after I was hired, Big River bought Gordon Biersch out of the West Coast, bought all their brewpub the brewpub division. They didn't buy the microbrewery, and then as they were growing more and more, they started building Gordon Biersches all over the country. So up until I was just leaving, I was working for Gordon Biersch, but it was a Rock Bottom location. Really weird.
I think more Rock Bottoms exist today than Gordon Biersch. I know here near Virginia Beach, Virginia, where I'm at, the old Gordon Biersch closed about a year and a half ago, and a new local Virginia brewery is taking its spot. But I believe there are still quite a few Rock Bottoms across the country.
There are. That company changed a lot. I mean, when I started there, it was not small. They probably had 10, 11 locations. And then it just grew and grew and grew, became very, very corporate, more and more corporate. After I left, they were, well, as I was leaving, they were bought out by a capital venture firm, or whatever they're called, that bought Gordon Bierce, bought Rock Bottom, and merged the two companies together. So they all became one. It just became more and more corporate. Eventually, all the old timers left. And then they started closing locations down, and so they are where they are now. So
interesting. I have quite a few questions about your experience working there. Like, the chain restaurant vibe of a place like Rock Bottom. I think it's nice because it approves to like the common person. While it might not appear to like all the super beer nerds like you or I, it's a little more approachable to some people. Do you feel the Rock Bottoms of the world played a role in teaching people about craft beer?
Oh, definitely. Most definitely. Yeah, I mean, between the Rock Bottom chain or even the Hops chain or anything like that, yeah, because it introduced people. Yeah, the beers were standard beers there. Let's see, we had an American Light Lager, a German Pilsner, American Red Ale, American Brown Ale, an IPA, which at that point was just IPA. There was no difference. It was an American IPA, and a stout. And those were the beers we had. But yeah, it definitely played a part. I would definitely say so. It introduced people to it.
Is that where you feel you got your brewing chops kind of like more trained?
I think so too. So I trained to be a head brewer, and it was just a matter of, the girl and I broke up, and so it was just they kept telling me, oh, you're going to be transferred here, transferred there. And like at one point I was supposed to go to DC, Memphis, Miami. They tried to, I asked for a transfer to Atlanta and they declined it, but they offered me a promotion to St. Augustine, Florida, which I declined. And it just all did that. And then my head brewer got transferred back to Chattanooga, where he was from, and I got promoted and stayed there. But oh yeah, I did. I think in the 11 years I was there, I personally did 800 brewhouse turns when I was there. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, I definitely learned how to make beer there. And people say, oh, these chains, there's good and bad. I learned a lot about corporate. I learned a lot about P&Ls and budgets and EBITDAs and all that kind of stuff, which is good because you're going to use that in the future or wherever you end up, even if it's for a small place. You have to know what your budgets and your costs are. I learned a lot about front of the house and back of the house, kitchen stuff. I'd have to sit in on meetings every Monday at 3:00. I'd sit there for 2 hours. I would talk for 2 minutes about beer, and then they would talk about liquor costs, food costs, staffing issues, points of service, all that kind of stuff. So it definitely helped a lot.
So I bet you felt back in those days that those meetings weren't worth your time, perhaps, because you only had 2 minutes in the spotlight. But at the end of the day, you were taking in so much knowledge, while you might not thought it was directly relevant to what you were doing with the business. I can totally see how those skills would help you later in your brewing career, whether at, you're still the days at Rock Bottom or, one of the smaller, more independent breweries you've worked at since.
Oh, most definitely. I had an experience with another brewery I was at after. It was a small little brew pub, and I was director of brewing. We had a head brewer, and he wanted to brew a beer. And this is the first professional gig he had. And he comes up to me and goes, hey, I want to brew this beer. I said, okay, have you sourced the ingredients? Have you costed it out? And he goes, no, I'm the head brewer. This is what I want to do. I said, once again, have you done this? No. So I said, do it. So I sourced the ingredients, not physically. I mean, I sourced where I could find them. I costed the recipe out. And 2-3 days later, he comes up to me and goes, so when are we putting this on the schedule? And I said, have you done this? No, I'm the head brewer. This is what I want to make. And I said, well, I costed it out. Boom, here's the sheet of paper. And he goes, yes, so? I said, this is going to cost triple what anything else is going to cost. You want to use Galaxy hops. Galaxy hops at the time were $30 a pound, if you could find them. And it was, I don't know, 3 pounds. It was something ridiculous, some ridiculous number. And I said, it's not cost effective. We're not going to do that. So he left to open his own place, and I took over there, and so that place eventually closed. But I ran into him. I did some consulting for him at his new place, and the first thing he says to me, he goes, man, my most popular beer is this New England IPA. I love to drink it. I hate to make it. The cost is through the roof. And I'm like, oh, really? Okay.
Did he remember that conversation you two had prior?
I didn't want to push it. He was being
But you know what? He might not have remembered it, but it obviously kind of stuck with him in a way, because it's something he continued to look at when he opened his own business. When he realized he wasn't just the head brewer, but he was the owner, there are things he had to consider.
Exactly.
No, that's a fun little story there. And is his brewery still open?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they're doing pretty good.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's interesting to kind of talk about the taproom model that places like Rock Bottom had back in the day, because arguably pre-pandemic and once again now, the taproom model is extremely popular. And there's even more crafty brands now that are, you have a location in Charlotte. Let's put one somewhere else. Let's put one somewhere else. Because they're a model to serve underserved communities. And I think the model's fantastic. And I think a lot of these earlier chains, they had something going for them. And I don't necessarily want to say they failed to, evolve with the times, but that could be part of it. They just didn't have the full vibe that the craft beer drinker wanted to experience.
Well, it depends on what your market is. So there was a brew pub in High Point in North Carolina. It's outside of Greensboro. And they had two breweries, one in Myrtle Beach, one in High Point, and they were owned by a restaurant group, I don't know, 20, 30 different restaurants. And I went to fill in there for the brewer for a few months before I took this gig. That brewer got hurt, was out for about 7 months. They didn't want to lose him. He didn't want to lose his job, so they brought in temporary brewers. So I filled in for him for a couple months, but I walked in there, and they had tried to hire me a couple times over the years before they hired this guy, and I just was not relocatable at the time. But anyway, so I walked in there, and it was like you were stuck in the mid-'90s. Their food menu was the same. The decor was the same. They were there for 20 years. Their beer menu had not changed in 20 years. They had the same beers, same recipes, and they did well. It didn't hurt that they were literally right across the street from a major university. But that was their locale, and that's what people wanted there. The number one selling beer was a blackberry wheat. The number two was a light lager.
Yeah, you have to know your demographic. You have to know your community, because sometimes a place like that right across from college can be very successful. What are you drinking right now, Dave?
This is our black lager, our Gossix black lager. I love this style of beer. I'm happy we got to do it here. I had done the first one I ever did one of these is when I was at Foothills in Winston-Salem. I was their pub brewer, and they would let they had two breweries, a brew pub, which I was the brewer at, and a production brewery. And they would let all the brewers come in and do their own beer. So I got to brew one there, and then when I was at Riverman, we made one, and then we made one here. So we did this one, I don't know, I want to say late last fall, and it went over well, and we decided to do it again, and we just canned it last week. We brought in a unit to can it, so that's what I'm sipping on.
It's a very underappreciated and delicious style. So we've already talked about a variety of styles. You started your career brewing more traditional things. You've had conversation with brewers over time about adding ridiculous amounts of Galaxy hops to beer. You love, a black lager yourself, a Schwarzbier. What are some of the trends in brewing that have totally blown your mind over the years? Is there anything that you're like, how in the world did that become popular? Or is there anything you were surprised that didn't become popular?
Yeah, I'm a little surprised. I mean, the evolution of the IPA from when I started, there were English IPAs and American IPAs, and that was it. So the evolution of the IPA has always kind of struck me as odd how it's gone. There was the American, then the West Coast dank, citrusy, piney ones, and then then the flavored ones, meaning the black IPA, white IPA, red IPA, or let me rephrase now, I guess colorful IPAs. And then the New England's kind of to me, you take the first bite with your eyes. You take the first sip with your eyes. And if I look at a glass that's a mucky mess, I don't necessarily want to drink it. Now, I've learned to adapt that a little bit over the last few years. But when that first came out, I was a little shocked. Then these milkshake IPAs now and these fruit smoothie IPAs, I just keep scratching my head at those and see where it's going to go next. I remember being, 10 years ago or even longer, someone would walk up to your bar and say, "What's the lightest beer you have?" And about a year and a half ago, I was at a brewery in the Charlotte region, and a lady walks up to the bar and says, "What's the latest IPA you have?" So now people associate craft with IPA. So that's kind of shocking. I'm not even
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm not even going to talk about the seltzer trend. So
yeah, I wasn't going to mention that, but I can relate to your frustration on the IPAs. I miss the days you could go to a brewery, you could look at their board, see they had an IPA, and know what you were getting into. Now you see 5 different IPAs on the board, and they're not very descriptive, titles or descriptive, explanations. You don't know what kind of IPA you're going to get. Is it an American style? Is it, more West Coast? Is it something hazy? You don't really know, and sometimes you have to ask. And you never want to take it for granted. Like even just the other day, I cracked open an IPA from a local Virginia brewery, and I'm reading the hops. And as I'm reading those hops, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to be super hazy when I poured it. But it wasn't. But you make yourself question what you're about to open or getting ready to get served.
Yeah, definitely. Or you go to a brewery that, I don't want to say pigeonhole, but they sort of do, where they might have 10 beers on tap and 8 of them are IPAs. So you go to them, and I always get flights. I love flights. I know people that say, oh, you can't really judge a beer, taste a beer in 2 ounces. I've judged many competitions. You could judge a beer drinking 2 to 3 ounces of beer. So, but I go and get a flight, and it's all IPAs. They're all just a little tiny different than each other. I don't know. I mean, breweries are successful that way. I see it a little different where I want to have, and I'm really glad that Dave, our founder, and I see eye to eye on this. We want to have a variety of brands that and a diverse portfolio where you're going to capture different types of beer drinkers. Oh, you want a malty beer. Oh, you want a hoppy beer. You want a light beer. Stuff like that.
No, I love that. Now, have you brewed any hazies at Lost Worlds?
We call them juicies, yes. Yeah, so when we were coming up with the portfolio for here, I knew we had to have an IPA. So I said, all right, we're going to do a West Coast. So that's our Vista IPA. Last year, Wine Enthusiast magazine ranked it in the top 50 IPAs, which is cool.
Amazing.
So that's our unofficial flagship. Between that and our light beer, it differs which one sells more. But yeah, so I knew we were going to do that, and then eventually we did what we call it an island IPA. So it's our Equator Island IPA. It's a juicy, hazy session IPA, 4.7 ABV, all the tropical notes. Sometimes it's hazier than others, but yeah.
So when you're figuring out the lineup of what you were going to make at Lost Worlds, how much of it was talking to your local consumers, figuring out they want a hazy, versus you and Dave's thoughts of what you'd like to have served?
Well,
and
we looked
on that.
Yeah, we looked at our demographic where we are. So we're just north of Charlotte in what's called the Lake Norman area. So Lake Norman is pretty much right next to us. It's a very affluent area. A lot of boating. There's some fishing in the area. Pools. Lots of golf courses. So we knew what our and it's an older demographic too. So, which I'll talk about that in a second. But when we looked, we knew we wanted to make a light beer because they sell. It's a golden ale, we call it, for lack of better terms. We won a gold medal for it last year at a regional competition. And then it was like, okay, well, we'll do something malty, so that'll be the porter. Okay, we have 2 IPAs. We did a Berliner Weiss for the sour. We don't want to do sour beers, so we make a tart Berliner Weiss and that kind of stuff. And then we do an American wheat where we have a 10-barrel brew house with 20-barrel fermenters and 10s that we could do a 20-barrel of an American wheat and take half of that and fruit it. So we do, like right now, we have our cherry wheat on 2 beers for the cost of, not cost, but the two beers for one pretty much. So we didn't really ask our clients. I mean, we went out to all the different breweries and bars and stuff and saw what people wanted, but we're a little bit of a different demographic than Charlotte. Charlotte, it's a great market. Trends kind of go there, hazy IPAs, sours. But like I said, we have a little bit of an older demographic here, 30s, 40s, 50s. And so he comes up to me last fall and goes, hey, are we going to brew an amber ale? And I'm like, an amber ale? They were popular in like the mid to late 90s. And he goes, we've had like a dozen different people ask us. So I asked a couple of the bartenders, well, we call them adventure guides. I asked a couple of them, And they're like, yeah, we've had people ask us. So we brewed an American Amber Ale. We call it Twain's. And it sold like that. So I said, oh, crap, we got to brew another one. So we brewed another one, boom, sold like that. So we let it go for a little while. We just brewed a batch, I don't know, about a month and a half ago, and we're down to 1 or 2 kegs of that left. We just had our weekly leadership meeting right before me and you got on. And I said, we're down to a couple of kegs. I was kind of going to let it go for a little bit, then bring it back in a couple of months. And they all looked at me and said, nope, do it again. I said, okay.
Well, here's what you should do. You should step back a second and think about it. You've got this audience who's craving your amber ales. And you know what a lot of people have missed a lot over the pandemic? That craft beer line culture, just waiting outside the brewery to get that whatever it may be. You need to have a line of people ready for those amber ales. Prove everybody wrong and prove that people will line up for something as traditional as an amber.
Yeah, we're still trying to figure out what our line beer is. So I make the analogy like Sexual Chocolate from Foothills, very famous imperial stout from them. I brewed it a bunch when I was there, but people would wait outside overnight there. You know, we'd have a party in the back of the brewery, a big bottle share the night before. That would end about 2:00 in the morning. In end of January, early February, it's cold, it might be snowing out, and then people would go outside and line up and camp out overnight. And at 8:00 in the morning, we'd open our doors and sell out of 2,000 bottles in 2.5 hours. So we're trying to figure out what that is for us. Or there's another brewery, Catawba Brewing, that has a few locations. They do a peanut butter and jelly beer, and that's their huge beer. Our taproom manager came from there, and he just tells us stories of them selling pallet after pallet in one day. So we'll figure out what that is. I don't know if it's an amber ale, but
well, it sounds like it's almost not your ethos to try to find that one beer that's going to be the overwhelmingly favorite. It sounds like you'd rather have a diverse lineup than have, well, we're 75% in this one beer, like a peanut butter and jelly, Sexual Chocolate, whatever it may be. Not saying those breweries are those percentages, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to be great at one thing. I want to be good at everything. Whether it's the beer, our steps of service, our vibe, all that. But as far as the beers, I want us to be good at everything.
No, I totally respect that. No, looking at Lost Worlds, I mean, an archaeology-themed brewery, do you do any like recreations of ancient recipes?
Have not yet. Not yet. We'll see about that. We call it Base Camp, our core brands. And that has somewhat grown a little bit because, like I said, an amber ale, we're just keeping on tap most of the time now or something else. We've done we did a collaboration with Town Brewing in Charlotte a month or so ago, 2 months ago maybe. Their head brewer / one of the owners and I used to work together at Foothills. And he calls me up one day and he goes, on like a Thursday, and says, hey man, you want to do a collab? We'll brew next week. Then we have a kitchen. We'll do a beer dinner with it. We'll have 2 of your beers, 2 of our beers. With the courses, the collab. And I was like, all right, yeah. So we went and met. And he says, well, what kind of style do you want to do? And he goes, Grotzer. And I'm like, smoked beers don't sell in our market at all. So we did one, and it tastes great. We added a little sea salt to it to give it a little flair. But yeah, it's just we're still sitting on like 5. Well, we split the batch. So I think we have like 4 or 5 kegs of it left. So
you should have brewed an amber. You should have brewed another amber.
Well, so another story. So Dave, our founder, loves smoked beers. I love smoked beers too. So he kept saying, well, let's do a Roush beer. And I'm like, Roush beer is not going to sell. We're going to sit on it. I said, you know what I'll do? I'll compromise. We'll make a smoked amber. And that's what we did. So, yeah. It turned out really well. We called it Krakatoa. He could tell you more about the stories of the beers. I concentrate on recipes and all that kind of stuff. But it sold okay until our regular amber went off tap. And then sales for the smoked amber went up, which was really weird. People saw amber. So I don't know. Maybe that is our white elephant or whatever.
Well, good luck figuring out. That's fascinating. It's always fun to talk to someone in an interesting market and see what works. It's always even more fun when it's not what the rest of the world is experiencing. So it's really neat insight you gave on what's working at Lost Worlds. And, while at Lost Worlds, you've received a lot of recognition so far. I mean, you mentioned Vista, your IPA, getting named one of the top 50 by, wine enthusiast. Yeah, wine enthusiast. But you also won a GABF medal already. Is that correct?
Yeah, we did. So the North Carolina Craft Brewers Guild puts on North Carolina Brewers Cup every year. So it's a BJCP sanctioned event. BJCP judges, industry people, judges. I've judged that a couple of years, and we won 3 golds and a bronze at that. Well, this past year was the highest volume of medals by a brewery, highest volume of gold medals by a brewery, and then a month later, GABF, we don't go out to Denver. We're sitting in our events room. We're all kind of watching it on the screen, and it's the first category, American wheat beers, silver medal, Emmer, Lost Worlds Brewing. We're just like, what? So that's the one we won a bronze for at the NC Brewers Cup, and we won a silver for it at GABF. So, a couple of years ago, when I was at Rivermen, we entered a competition called the Carolinas Championship of Beers, and it's around a beer festival called Hickory Hops out of Hickory, North Carolina, and we won a few medals at it. And I the day of the festival, the organizer comes up to me and he says, he's a beer drinker of the year. So I don't know if you remember, the Win Coop used to have the beer drinker of the year competition. Well, he won it one year. So he comes up to me and he says, you won a gold medal, a first-year brewer. And I'm like, I'm not a first-year brewer, though. I've been doing this for 20 years already. So he's like, you're right. So, yeah, as a brewery to come out with that in the first 6 months for us, yeah, that was nice. I never expect to win anything anytime. I'm always hopeful, but I don't expect it and get upset if we don't. I mean, that's just silly. I'm not a competitive person like that. But it was kind of cool. I mean, my phone blew up for 2 days nonstop. I had to actually turn it off when I wanted to go to sleep. It was cool. So, yeah.
It's unfortunate you didn't get to walk across the stage, but still absolutely amazing. You got your recognition.
I did. I did get to walk across the stage a few years ago in 2016 when I was Director of Brewing at Noda Brewing in Charlotte. We won a gold that year. So that was really cool to get to walk up on the stage for that. I was there with their controller and their head brewer / co-owner. So that was cool. But yeah, I mean, this would have been cool too. We'll see in the future.
You got to experience it virtually. Still quite the honor. Now, in your career, I mean, you spent so much time working at breweries. How many breweries have you been with over your 25 years in the industry? You don't have to count, but just an approximate number.
Not a lot. I mean, so let's say James Bay, Rocky Bay, Belfast Bay, Rock Bottom, Foothills, Noda, Rivermen, and Lost Worlds. So 8. But some of those, like Foothills, I was there for almost 5 years, and I'd probably still be there today. But Winston's about 95 miles from where I live. And the idea was to move to Winston, but with a wife and 4 boys, it just never happened. So I'd go up there. I basically commuted. I'd stay up there. I'd go on a Sunday or Monday and come home on a Friday or Saturday. I'd crash on someone's couch, rent a room, whatever, from a friend or something. And after almost 5 years of that, we made the decision not to move. And I had a very difficult conversation, emotional conversation with someone who I respect immensely and who's a good friend of mine, Jamie Bartholomew, and tell him that I was leaving his company. So to come back to Charlotte.
Yeah, that has to be a tough time, but I can't even imagine like the toll it took on you and your family just taking those drives back and forth and the time apart, even for you not having a place that was necessarily yours in Winston-Salem.
It was. My wife is a very independent person. She could handle it, but I'd get back to for 3 years I stayed with friends that in a spare bedroom of the house. Their kids were growing out of the house. They were huge beer lovers, so I just brought beer home all the time. And I'd get home from after work and open my laptop to watch TV or a movie or whatever. I'd call her and be like, "Hey, how's it going?" And just the kids would be in the background, and she's like, "What?" And they'd tell me everything that they've done throughout the day. "What are you doing?" I'm going to eat some food and watch TV, go to bed early. I mean. So it took an emotional turn. It was rough, and I just, like I said, as much as I love Foothills, it was time. We weren't going to move. I made the decision that we weren't going to move, and I came back to Charlotte. So yeah,
I imagine as hard as it was probably the right decision to come back closer to your family, and I bet everybody was very happy to have you home full time.
Yeah, I mean, when I sat down in Jamie's office, him and TL's the brewmaster there. I didn't know. I'd sent him a text saying, "Hey, I want to chat with you guys later," because they were at the production brewery and I was at the pub. And TL, I didn't even know he was on vacation that week, my boss. And he's like, "Oh, I'm on vacation." So I was like, "All right, well, I'll go talk to Jamie." And I sit down and close the door. And I was friends with him way before I got a job there. And I handed him my letter of resignation. He goes, "I understand, family." And I was like, "Yeah." So,
yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we only wish the best for the people we love the most. So, as tough as it might have been on a business level, personally, it sounds like you totally understood and respected your move.
Oh, yeah.
So since you moved back to the Charlotte area, I mean, you're still really busy. I mean, you're at a brewery that's been in business less than 2 years now. How do you balance time between your family and your time at the brewery?
My wife, I met her.
4 boys, is that correct?
4 boys, yeah. The oldest is out of the house. He's moved out. But I got 3, a 14-year-old, almost 12, and almost 10-year-old. My wife, I was a brewer before I met her. And like I said, she's very understanding. She knew that, there are times that I'm at the brewery. I spent 2 anniversaries in a row with a broken glycol chiller. We were supposed to go out to dinner, and I called her, "Hey, my chiller's busted. I'll bring a pizza home." And she's totally fine. On our honeymoon, we went to 7 breweries. On our 1-year anniversary, we went to GABF, her idea. So, I mean, she understands I'm a brewer and things come up, and, I might be at the brewery for hours upon hours. But when I'm not here, I'm not here, and I'm a family man. So. And my kids go to a lot of breweries and love it. So,
I absolutely love it. So, like when you do get to escape with the family, how do you unwind and disconnect from your craft beer world?
Things I like to do for fun, I guess. Hang out with them, go hiking. I love hiking, trail hiking. But my mind, I hate to say this, my mind is always going. It's always work related somehow. Even when I'm on vacation, I go to breweries. I'm going up to New York to visit my folks, and my sister's getting married, so I'll be at her wedding. And I'm trying to think if I could do a collab while I'm on vacation up there. We'll see. I've done that before. So I don't know. I mean, my life is beer, revolves around beer. And it's part of our life. It puts a roof over our heads, clothes on our back, food on our bellies. I've had to have this conversation with my kids' teachers. So my kids go to a charter school. It's not private. It's not public. And my oldest, he's 25 now. When he was in, I guess, elementary school, me and Nikki, my wife, had went out to GABF. And so my wife's mom was picking him up from school, dropping him off. And the teacher says to him, "Where's your mom and stepdad? Why are they not taking you?" "Oh, they're in Colorado." "What are they doing in Colorado?" "They're at a beer festival." So we had already had a scheduled parent-teacher conference weeks before that. So we show up for it. The teacher looks at me and says, I have to ask you, why were you in Colorado?" I handed her my business card. I said it was business related. She goes, "Woo, I thought I was going to have to call social services on you." I was like, "What?" So ever since then, every year, because my kids talk about beer, they talk about going to breweries, they talk about brewing. My 14-year-old, when he was 4 years old, he could tell you by smelling a beer, telling you what style of beer it was. So I remember one of them was doing a project, and they had to put pictures of a gas, a liquid, and a solid, and the liquid was cut out of a magazine, was a glass of beer. So we get a letter from the teacher saying we're not allowed to talk about alcohol, and she didn't know what I did for a living. So I had a conference with her, and I said, we teach our kids about beer. We teach them the importance of it as an unconventional, career path possibly, but also the importance of responsibility and responsibility with alcohol. We've had friends that have done this as their kids grew. They would let their kids try a little tiny bit of beer. And then when they got up, they didn't, of course, college, they binge a little bit, but they didn't binge as much as other people. So we sort of do that with our kids too. Let them get a little sniff, a little tiny little taste. And then just they understand. They understand the social significance of it, the economic, and all that kind of stuff.
Now, you talked a couple minutes ago about the value of flights and how 2 ounces you can appreciate a beer and understand it. I have a 2-year-old. How much should he be trying when he's trying to, sample some of these?
Well, whenever I pour at a beer festival, people say, "Oh, I just want a little bit." I'm like, a little bit to a brewer is a full pint. So, it's just a sip or two. That's all we've given now.
But in all seriousness, when you've raised 4 children, you had that awkward parent-teacher conference where they're almost very curious about your relationship with your beer and the children's relationship with beer. Has that changed over the years? Have you found that adults in your children's lives, like teachers, counselors, people like that, have become more accepting of the role of craft beer and culture?
Honestly, I think so. I think as craft beer has kind of exploded over the last few years, and it's more sociable. I mean, look when we talked about tap rooms earlier. Look at the role of tap rooms. You're seeing families coming into them. It's not a taboo where 10, 15, 20 years ago you either went to a brewery restaurant, brew pub, or you went to a production brewery that didn't even have a tap room. Now the hybrid model of a tap room, and there's things to do, there's games. I worked at a brew pub, Riverman, and I thought this was ingenious. We made a little spot in the corner that was a kids area. We had a little TV, we had games and puzzles, coloring books. We painted the walls like chalkboards so you could do that. I thought it was ingenious because the parents could sit at their table and they could eat in peace. They could have another beer, whatever, converse, and the kids could go play. They finish their mac and cheese in 30 seconds, and then they're off to the play area. So
how did that go over with most of the customers there? Was it appreciated by all just like it was for you?
Oh, yeah, it really was. We actually, there was a time when we decided not to open for lunch. And we would have parent groups come in and saying, could they have like play dates there? And we would open up, they'd have a glass of wine or a beer or something when the moms or even dads would get together and the kids would be playing. That was a win-win-win.
No, I absolutely love it. It's interesting to see, as craft beer becomes even more, acceptable, where we go next. I've taken my child, to brewery since he was just a few weeks old. It's going to become part of his, life just like it is your children. And his middle name is actually Brewer. It's a family name, actually, not because he will maybe someday be a brewer, but it's a family name. So I think it's going to be in his blood as well. And it'll be very fun to see the role of craft beer just in American culture over the next decade and beyond.
I agree. My youngest son's name is Porter. So that was my wife's idea. And I'm like, okay, so he comes up to me a couple of days ago. He's going to be 10 in November. And we were talking about Foothills, and Foothills has their People's Porter, which is one of my all-time favorite beers. And I made a lot of it when I was there. And we were somehow talking about it. He goes, Daddy, am I named after People's Porter? And my wife and I are like, no, your dad's a brewer, and it's one of his favorite styles. And, you're named Porter.
That's hilarious. Do you think any of your children will go into the brewing world? Have any shown any signs? I know you wanted to be a history teacher, and you ended up at an archaeology-themed brewery, so that's kind of makes sense. But when I'm talking to one of your kids 25 years from now, I'm like, hey, when your dad was raising you, did you want to go into the industry as well? What would they say?
I don't know. Let's see, my oldest is a mechanic. My 14-year-old is probably going to be some sort of an engineer. He's just he loves beer. He could, like I told you, even at age 3 or 4, he could smell a beer. At 4, I guess he could smell a beer and tell you what style it was. All my kids appreciate it. I don't know if they'll get into it. A couple of years ago, my 12-year-old or almost 12-year-old named Drake. He had the first day of school. They had to write a little thing about him, say what their name was, what they wanted to be when they grow up, and it was on a piece of paper, and it said Brewer on it. And he said, took a picture of it, sent it to me, and this and that. So I don't know if they will or not. Who knows? I'm not going to force my kids to do anything. They're their own people. They're their own lives. I'm just going to be supportive of them.
That it is a proud moment, though, when you get sent a picture of your kid saying he wants to be a brewer when he grows up.
Yeah.
So looking back over your, was it 25 years in the industry now, give or take? What's one of the proudest moments that you've had, like looking back at something you will always say, wow, this was awesome. It made me feel really great about myself, what I've done, my time in the industry. What would that be for you?
There's a few. So I never, I try to stay really humble. I never pat myself on the back. And I remember we were sitting at the bar, Rock Bottom, one day, my wife and I, and we had made a beer, and I can't remember. I think it was a Belgian Wit. It was my recipe. And I just tried. I said, wow, that was good. Wow, that was really good. So, something like that. Or when people come up to you and say, hey, man, this is really good. I mean, obviously, being part of a team that won a gold at GABF and being on that stage, winning the medal last year, that meant a lot, actually. That was my recipe. I trained our brewer here. I have a hand in every single batch we do. Those kind of things. But let's see, another one. All right, a sexual chocolate release. So I ran the pub brewery. So I would organize the bottle share. I would oversee the selling of the bottles, and I would give a toast at 5 o'clock on that Friday. And I stood up on the bar, completely packed bar, news crews with the lights on me, and I'm just like, all right. So I give the toast for the beer to be released, to be tapped. And I got down, and there were two owners of the company, and the other owner, Jamie's partner, looks at me and goes, man, that was awesome. Great job. And those kind of things are cool. I hate being a celebrity. Years ago, the local homebrew club organized trips. I mean, they didn't organize a trip to a hockey game. So the Charlotte Checkers used to play minor league hockey, used to play in Uptown Charlotte, which is downtown, but it's called Uptown. And we'd all met at Rock Bottom, and I had pretty imbibed a lot that night. And then we're walking through the arena, and they had cheerleaders. I'd never seen cheerleaders at a hockey game. I'm a huge hockey fan. And one of the cheerleaders, really attractive blonde, turns around and goes, hey, you're Dave Gonzalez. And I was so taken back. I just looked at her and said, do I know you? And she she gets cowers. She gets all upset. She's like, yeah, you gave me and my group a tour one time. And I felt so embarrassed. So we're driving home that night, and I'm on my phone, and I'm trying to find the organization's email to email them and say, I'm so sorry if this person wants to contact me, and so I could apologize. And it was the celebrity weird thing, and I don't see that. I'm a human being. I make beer for a living.
But I think that's how a lot of people not in the industry look at people like yourself who've been brewing for a long time. You are essentially a beer celebrity, whether you like it or not, because being the head brewer at a brewery, it's a kind of romantic type of job. You've made some of their favorite beers over, their drinking career, and they feel connected to you. And I think it's awesome that she recognized you.
I've met a lot of celebrities, whether musicians, hockey players, whatever. I met Eric Clapton once. We passed each other on an escalator in FAO Schwartz. We said hi to each other. But
was he like, hey, you're Dave Gonzalez?
Yeah, right. I was in high school, yeah. And but I remember the first time I sort of met Jim Cook from Sam Adams. Being somewhat new in the beer business. You look up those people. Pete Schlossberg from Pete's Wicked Ale. Those kind of people back then, and we're at the GABF, and it's the awards ceremony, and back then you stood up in part of the arena and watched it. So we're standing there, it's me, my wife's in front of me, and a guy in front of her, and they announce Sam Adams wins a medal. This guy goes, yes, stands up, turns around, and walks straight right into my wife, and it's Jim Cook. I'm like, oh, hi, Mr. Cook, how are you doing, sir? I mean, yeah.
Well, Mr. Cook was obviously extremely approachable in that situation unintentionally, but, people like him in the industry for quite some time, the industry leaders, I shot him an email once a couple of years ago. You do it on a whim. You never expect a response. You get a response. He gives you feedback. I think it's sincere people like him, and I'll even throw you in that category, who just like talking and like learning and like sharing with others. That's how craft beer continues to grow, by just, conversations like this where we can learn about one another, because you're not just a brewer, you're a person, you've got a story, and it's so fun to hear those little things that make you excited, whether it's your son saying he's going to be a brewer when he grows up, or you talking about that awkward moment where your wife bumped into Jim Cook. It's just things like that you don't forget.
Yeah, it's it's a fun job, it's a fun career. I love what I do. And I love helping people. Every email that comes through, or if we get a compliment from someone, I respond to them. I mean, and they're thinking, oh, the brewers respond to me. I mean, but it's relationships. everything in this business is relationship. The relationship you have with your customer across the bar, your customer being an account, your vendor. I mean, every time I talk to one of our vendors, I become friends with them. And the first thing I say to them, I get an email like, hey, how's the little one doing? Or how was that vacation? Oh, and by the way, we'd like to order 5 pallets of this. I mean, it's just, everything's about relationships. I mean, beer is a social lubricant. It's the beer of the people. Why not keep it that way?
No, I absolutely love it. And, I really appreciate you coming to hang out for an hour, just talking about your career in the craft beer industry. And I truly look forward to sharing a beer with you. I know, like I said, I feel like I've got to know you through the internet, but it's going to be great. And you're in Charlotte, I'm in Virginia. We're not too far from one another. So hopefully we're sharing a beer before too long, Dave. So
I think you posted on the forum that you'll be at CBC. We're going out in 25 years. This will be the first CBC I go to. It's always been at a bad time that, at rock bottom, they sent the regional brewers. I wasn't a regional brewer. And then, I get to the foothills and I was the responsible one. So I had to stay back and the other people went or whatever. And it never worked out. So this year we're going, we're only gonna be there a couple days. It's very abbreviated, but hopefully we'll get together then and have a beer together.
We're going to absolutely have a beer there, Dave. So thanks again for hanging out today, and I will see you in just a couple months.
Yeah,
Cheers.
Sounds great, buddy. Cheers.
Bye.